In this video, we'll be looking at the complex trade patterns in Asia. And because Asia was the largest continent with the largest populations and the oldest civilizations, they already had a very well-developed system of trade networks that dated back thousands of years. So by 1250 CE, trade works connected the main population and the production centers of Asia to Africa and Europe as well. So we're going to start with trade in the South Pacific, and if you're not familiar with this area, I highly encourage you, if you can, to get out a map or go to Google Images and type in the South Pacific, because we're going to be talking about islands there. And I would love for this to kind of come together in your head based on where these are geographically. So a group of people migrated from South China and Southeast Asia about 6,000 years ago, and they went to the Philippines, Indonesia, and Taiwan. And even further eastward, some settled in Polynesia. And this is a cluster of islands almost right in the middle of Australia and South America. And so the Polynesians continued to sail eastward, and they used these single and double canoes. They were about 100, 150 feet long, and they were made of wood, basically, and they were held together by fiber cords. They carried not only men and women, but also food supplies and livestock. So these were very sturdy, capable canoes of traveling the South Pacific with heavy cargo. So the Polynesians went as far northeast as Hawaii by 400 CE and as far southeast as Easter Island, also by about 400 CE. They also went as far southwest as New Zealand, around 750 CE. And so they were considered the greatest seafaring people of pre-modern times. And despite the fact that they were traveling through thousands of years and thousands of miles, the Polynesians preserved several remarkable similar elements of culture throughout these islands. Again, this is not a landmass, this is a cluster of islands. And they have similar tools throughout the islands. The names of plants are the same. Their terms of kinship, their artistic and cultural styles are the same, and many of those are the same in Polynesia even today. And so the question is, did they make it to the Americas? And some historians argue that they did make it to the Americas, and they say the fact that there are sweet potatoes and manioc or cassava, it's like a root plant where we get tapioca from. But because those made it to the East Coast, many historians believe that the Polynesians reached the Americas. Whether they did or not, we don't know for sure, but they certainly did not establish permanent connections to the Americas. Another asset to trade in Asia was the contribution of the Malay people in the South China Sea. And Malaysia is sandwiched between the Philippines and Indonesia, sort of across from Vietnam. So what were the four major legacies that the Malay sailors left behind? The first one was cargo ships, and sometimes they're called jongs or junks. That's what they're called in English. But these are massive ships capable of carrying 400 to 500 tons, 2 to 4 masts, 2 rudders, and just multi-layered hulls. So ships that are capable of carrying a lot of weight. The second contribution of the Malay sailors was the balance lug square sails. And these are basically sails that could be turned to face into the wind or to tack against the wind. And basically, it just gave the sailors greater maneuverability. The third thing that they left behind was they studied the patterns of the seasonal monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean and learned to sail with them. And so they just began to take into account the weather when they were sailing. And the fourth contribution of the Malay sailors was that they made regular voyages of 3,000 miles across the Indian Ocean using their ship technology and their knowledge of the winds. And so they were able to travel great distances because of these things. The Indian Ocean was the crossroads of the world's shipping, and this was from 1300 to 1500. This is sort of the hub of sea trade during this time period. And this was the site where the rise of the Arab traders took place. From the 8th to the 16th century, Arab Muslim traders became masters of the Arabian Sea. And in fact, Islam encouraged trade. One of the 5 pillars of Islam was the Hajj, or the pilgrimage that required every Muslim to go to Mecca. And of course, this necessitated travel. So this led to the rise of Muslim traders. So though they began in the Arabian Sea, Muslim traders dominated the Indian Ocean by about 760 after the shift of the Abbasid Caliph to Baghdad. And the rise of the Muslim Sultanate in Delhi, India in the 13th century extended Muslim influence even further eastward. And the reason that they were able to attain this Arab dominance was because of their knowledge that they learned from conquest of trading culture. So they were borrowers of culture from other people, and they used that to enhance their own trade. And they became very gifted at sailing with the monsoon winds. And there was an Arab Muslim, Ahmad ibn Majid, which I'll put his name up here, who compiled a comprehensive 15th century guide to navigation, which told other people how to travel appropriately based on the seasons and the monsoon winds. And because of that, they were able to dominate the sea lanes from the Mediterranean coast all the way to China. And with that, Islam spread. So along with the trade goods, Muslims brought their religious ideas as well. China, trade magnet. So by 1500, China was a magnet for world trade, and this was because they were, economically speaking, the most advanced region in the world. And China is massive, so its internal trade, or its trade within, far outweighed its foreign trade, or its external trade. And because it's so rich and varied in its productivity, others came to China for their products more than China traveled abroad to take their products. So the policies toward trade in China varied depending on the dynasty. For instance, the Song dynasty that was overrun by Mongols had to abandon their territories and relocate to the south and reconstruct its entire economy. The Ming dynasty overthrew the Mongols and undertook a series of ocean voyages. And then in a reversal policy, later the Ming emperors came in and forbade the Chinese to trade overseas at all. So it really depended on who was emperor. So international trade. China periodically engaged in ocean trade, and that was especially true after the Ming asserted its power by sea after 1368. And the luxury products that attracted thousands of foreign merchants in China were silk, porcelain, and tea. And there were a few Lombards and Germans and French, but many of these foreign traders were Muslim Arabs, and generally they were treated as welcome guests in China. And the most noted Chinese sailor at this time was a guy named Jing He. And he was a Muslim eunuch who was commissioned by the Ming Emperor Yongle to take a series of 7 ocean-going expeditions. And he took tons of ships and like a 30,000 member crew, and carried silks and porcelain and pepper all over the place, and they sailed even as far as Calicut, which is near the southwest tip of India. And in 6 other missions between 1407 and 1433, he sailed to ports all along the Indian Ocean. And Emperor Yongle was thrilled with the things that Zheng He brought back to him. And he was most impressed with the giraffe that was sent to him by the Sultan of Malindi on the 4th voyages. But these expeditions demonstrated the skill and the vision of Zheng He. Unfortunately, in 1433, the Ming Emperor ended his sponsorship of these Indian Ocean voyages. And there's lots of speculation about why he ended the voyages or his sponsorship of the voyages, but most historians believe that he wanted to focus on the internal problems in China. And that became sort of destructive to the Ming Dynasty because they became vulnerable to new sea powers. After that, Chinese society became introverted and Chinese culture stagnated. They were less imaginative. Military technology improved a little bit, but even that too stagnated because China cut off its trade relations with the rest of the world. Internal trade in China. And as I've already said, internal trade made up the bulk of trade in China. When Marco Polo came to China in 1275, he was completely overwhelmed and astonished by the splendor and wealth of the country. And he even described the Mongol ruler Kublai Khan as the mightiest man. And no one knows whether he was talking about the number of subjects or the treasure or the size of the territory, but Marco Polo reported correctly that China in the late 1200s was the most technologically progressed, the largest and the richest country in the world. And part of that was because of an agricultural revolution, which underpinned this technological advance. The Chinese had better soil preparation and conservation. They improved seeds that would often allow them to grow more than one crop per season. They had better water control and irrigation than other countries at the time, and they were really good at specializing crops. China had also built and maintained large regional capitals, had invented woodblock printing that allowed for the spread of ideas, and one of the first uses of woodblock printing was so that religious ideas and religious concepts could be spread. And all of that together, the agricultural improvements, the woodblock printing, the large capitals, inspired a trade revolution. And trade even became monetized, meaning they were using money instead of bartering. And they had copper as their principal form of currency. And merchants even invented a new type of credit to facilitate trade. And in China, the government controlled trade. And so trade made up an increasing share of government revenue. And in 1128, maritime trade brought in 20% of China's total cash revenues. And so to better enhance their trade, they smoothed out the water passages because many of the stopping points were arranged near dangerous rapids and cataracts. So they put double locks on the man-made Grand Canal, and that system helped to link the agricultural wealth of the South with the northern administrative cities. And tugboats that had human-powered paddle wheels serviced the main ports. And because of this, the Chinese ocean-going ships gained a reputation as the best in the world. And we will end there, and we'll pick up with the Pax Mongolica tomorrow.